Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event co-sponsored by UNAIDS, UNDP, the Center for Global Health Policy and Politics at Georgetown University's O'Neill Institute, and the Global Network of People Living with HIV, GNP+. My name is Umunyana Rujeje. I'm the head of human rights at UNAIDS. I'm speaking to you from Johannesburg, where I'm based. We are here to launch the HIV Policy Lab's new report, Progress and Peril, HIV and the Global Decriminalization of Same-Sex Sex. The report is co-authored by GHPP, UNDP, and GNP+, and reviews the state of laws criminalizing same-sex sex across 193 countries tracked by the Policy Lab. We have shared in the chat box the website, HIV Policy Lab, where you can find the report. So today we have an excellent panel of experts from the O'Neill Institute, UNAIDS, UNDP, GNP+, and CHELP to share and discuss key findings from the report, including the recent historic decriminalization of same-sex sex, the link between decriminalization and progress in the global HIV response, and the troubling reverse trend of anti-LGBTQ+ laws, prosecution, and discrimination. Kindly use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we will get to them once we've heard from all of our experts. If you're interested in scheduling an additional interview with any of the experts, please do reach out to the communications contacts listed in the chat box for you. So we will begin from hearing from Dr. Matthew Kavanagh, who is the director of the Center for Global Health Policy and Politics, housed at Georgetown University's O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law and the School of Health. Matt will provide an overview of the key findings from the Progress and Peril report. Over to you, Matt.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. The report, as Umunyana was saying, is called Progress and Peril because we see 3 or 4 different major trends going on throughout the world, including very significant progress, but also peril amidst it, and we're going to talk through those very quickly. The report is now available online at the link that you were just shared. A decade ago, the Global Commission on HIV and the Law joined longtime calls from the AIDS movement to ensure that we removed the criminal laws that were subjecting LGBTQ people around the world to arrest and prosecution simply because of their relationships and because of their sexuality. That has been a barrier to the AIDS response that has been long recognized. And that call from the Global Commission a decade ago was a landmark one. It then led later to goals that were set by member states of the United Nations a few years ago, where they set a goal for the first time to remove laws that were standing in the way of the AIDS response. And the HIV global strategy that was created out of the UNAIDS board set a goal that less than 10% of countries would criminalize same-sex relationships by 2025. We're here to launch the HIV Policy Lab report. It is a report coming from a collaboration between United Nations, academic and civil society organizations to track, measure, and improve the HIV-related law and policy environment around the world. We track 33 different indicators across 194 countries. And today we're going to talk about one of those indicators, but you can go to the website and see all 33. On this issue, the HIV Policy Lab measures 2 different pieces. First, it measures the de jure content of law. It measures whether or not a country in written law makes it a criminal offense to have or engage in same-sex sexuality. That is the core measure that we use for understanding what the written law is. And then the second measure is whether a country's policy is to avoid prosecuting people for same-sex acts. The Global Commission and a wide variety of UN agencies have called for where there is a problematic criminalizing law, that countries should not enforce it. There should be a moratorium. And some countries have clearly responded to that, whether or not it's a written moratorium or simply what we call a de facto policy. At the start of the AIDS response, over 120 countries and territories around the world, the vast majority of the world at the time, criminalized same-sex sex at the time. We are now seeing, this report shows, a reversal of that trend, so that now 129 countries around the world do not criminalize same-sex sex in 2023. That has been a key part of securing the progress that's been made against HIV. Today, as of this year, 2/3 of countries do not criminalize same-sex sex in written law. That means that today, 63% of all the people living with HIV in the world are living in contexts where same-sex sexuality is not illegal. Just in the last few years, since 2017, we've seen 13 countries decriminalize consensual same-sex sex under law. It's a wide variety of countries. You see them here in multiple different regions of the world, at multiple different income levels. Some of the world's leading economies have made this move. Some of the countries with the highest rates of HIV have made this move just in the last few years, following the science and following the evidence that we will talk about. The trend is very clear. The trend is toward decriminalization. And in fact, countries are getting closer and closer to reaching that 10-10-10 target, with the fastest progress coming in the Caribbean and in the East and Southern African region, where many, many countries just in the last few years have moved towards decriminalization. The second piece that the Policy Lab measures is there a policy of enforcing criminalizing laws where they are on the books? And what we find is that of those countries that criminalize, 37% of them don't actually enforce the law as written, 24 countries around the world. So of the 129 countries that don't criminalize, plus we can report that 24 countries, for the very best of our efforts to find the information, it seems we have no reports of prosecutions in 24 additional countries. The Policy Lab report also runs through a number of different public health impacts, and I want to highlight a few right here of this process. The reason why we're here talking about the decriminalization of LGBTQ people around the world is because it has a clear link to HIV outcomes. Two studies using HIV Policy Lab data show two important findings. One, that in fact, not only are there higher rates of HIV among gay men and bisexual men and other men who have sex with men in countries that do criminalize, but that the gap between MSM, gay men and other men who have sex with men, and the general adult population of men in the country, that gap is in most countries real, and in countries that don't criminalize, gay men have a 7.2% higher prevalence. But in countries that do criminalize, the gap, the inequality between those two groups is 24.8% difference in prevalence. That's a massively different gap. That's the work of law. That in fact, we see that this is not just for gay men and other men who have sex with men, but it's also for the general population. That we found that at the highest level, that actually knowledge of HIV status among the whole population and viral suppression among the whole population is significantly higher where decriminalization has happened. Amidst all of this progress, we have to report that there are also counter trends, that we see deepening criminalization in countries that are out of step with those global trends, that are imposing harsher penalties, long prison sentences, expanding the scope of criminalization. And the report details challenges in places like Russia, like Uganda, like the United States of America, when it comes especially to trans people, like Hungary, where we're seeing contexts of increasing efforts to criminalize. And those are worrying. Those are clearly out of step with the global trend. And our hope is that actually the global trends will continue and that shift will be reversed. I would be remiss if I didn't also just mention briefly non-discrimination protections, that just simply not criminalizing is insufficient to receive the full public health benefits we know come from a smart legal environment that's actually pro-health. And so what we see here is that while many countries have decriminalized, less than half of countries that don't criminalize also have protections on the basis of both gender identity and sexual orientation. And so there's work to do around the world. I won't go into the details, but the report also gives you case studies on decriminalization in Angola, Mauritius, Singapore, Botswana, India, Cook Islands, Gabon, and Antigua and Barbuda. And what it shows is that there are multiple pathways to decriminalization, that there's no one size fits all, and that most places at one point looked impossible until they were possible. The report also makes the economic case and shows the significant positive impact on GDP, as well as the strong human rights case. I won't go deeply into the AIDS response lessons, but they are here. And we ask everyone to go ahead and go over to the HIV Policy Lab, where you can go ahead and see the full report. And I'll turn it back over to our moderator and the rest of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for making the case for decriminalization so crisply and making the link to public health and the right to health. I would like now to turn to Winnie Byanyima, who is the Executive Director of UNAIDS and the Under Secretary General. Winnie, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Umunyana. And thank you all for joining us today for this launch of this very important report, and a report with good news from our partnership at the HIV Policy Lab. Thank you, Matt, for that excellent presentation. 2.5 years ago, member states of the United Nations boldly pledged to close the inequalities driving AIDS. That included creating enabling legal environments with a goal that by 2025, less than 10% of countries in the world would have punitive laws standing in the way of ending the AIDS pandemic. This report shows how the world is increasingly rejecting the criminalization of LGBTQ people. That is such a positive message. To repeat, as of this year, 2/3 of countries in the world, 2/3, do not criminalize. It's 1/3 that still criminalizes. This is a major change, as Matt said, since the early days of AIDS. It's actually a total reversal. 2/3 were criminalizing same-sex sex when the AIDS pandemic was just hitting the world. Today, it is 1/3 only. It is part of why so much progress has been made globally on AIDS. Just since 2017, that's 6 years ago, 13 countries removed criminalization. 13 countries. They now have increased their pandemic fighting capacity. Instead of sending a message of condemnation and fear, these governments are encouraging their people to come into the health system and get what they need for their well-being. They are realizing the commitment to health rights for all. There are some who say that this is a Western agenda, but no. Look at this report. India, Botswana, Angola, Gabon, Barbados, Venezuela, and just a few weeks ago, Mauritius. That is the South. The South is moving. Some argue that criminalizing gay people comes from our values. But no, and no, and no. I want to quote the Supreme Court of Mauritius when it overturned their criminal law. The court wrote, and I'm quoting them, "Its enactment was not the expression of domestic democratic will, but was a course imposed on Mauritius and other colonies by British rule," unquote. That is true for so many of our countries in Africa. If you follow me on social media, you will see always a raging debate between homophobes whose one argument all the time is that gay sex is un-Ugandan, gay sex is un-African. The truth is that the laws that we have are colonial laws, laws that came from Britain that has since decriminalized. Some say changing laws is too hard, and instead we must just build programs to work around them. Let me be clear, even great health programs cannot make up for harmful laws. Criminalizing laws alone increase HIV rates, as Matt has shown. It's time for the leaders then of the 1/3 countries that still criminalize to step up and catch up. Those who are pushing in the opposite direction, and sadly, such as my own country, Uganda, towards deepening criminalization, they are on the wrong side of public health, on the wrong side of economic growth, and on the wrong side of history. They should change. This report shows the world can reach the 2025 goals to remove harmful laws. We can do it. I want to finish by talking about how. It takes champions within government who are willing to step up. We should find them and empower them. It takes activists and movements outside government to challenge criminalization. We should invest in social movements, social justice movements against criminalization. The case studies in this report show legislatures do change course. We've seen that. And they can adapt new laws. And it also shows sometimes efforts that do not win in legislatures, win in courts. Courts have also done this. Global health and development funders, we must redouble our support to changing laws and policies by supporting change agents in governments and judiciaries and by supporting movements of people. I call on governments that have not yet removed criminalizing laws to do so. The countries that recently reformed their laws started by not enforcing them. Today, as we've heard, 24 countries have criminalizing laws that they are not enforcing. They are not prosecuting people under those laws. So let us start there. Here are some countries already in that position. The Caribbean is the region that's decriminalizing at the fastest rate. So I hope in the Caribbean we can support Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines to do the same. They are not using the laws to prosecute. They are not enforcing the laws. They can move on to decriminalize. We should support them. In Africa, I hope Eswatini, Comoros, Kenya, Liberia, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Sudan and Togo, we can talk about how to take the next step from non-enforcement to decriminalization. We are ready to support. And of course, the same in Europe, in the Middle East, Asia Pacific, and around the world. We can end AIDS by 2030 if we address the inequalities driving the pandemic, including removing these harmful laws. This report shows us that this is achievable. Thank you so much, Umunyana.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you so much for your words of inspiration and encouragement for the work still to come. You spoke about the investment in social justice movements, which is critically important and allows me to introduce our next speaker, Florence Anam, who is joining us from Geneva, I believe, also attending the Global Fund meetings. Florence is the co-executive director of GNP Plus, the global network of people living with HIV. Over to you.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you, Umunyana. And very fortunately, I am not in Geneva. I'm joining you from a little village in Kenya called Bondo. For those who know, Kisumu is probably the nearest airport. Yeah. So everyone, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to provide the perspectives of our organization, the Global Network of People Living with HIV, GNP+. A little about us. We are a global network of people living with HIV, run by people living with HIV. Our vision is a world where every person living with HIV enjoys their right to a healthy and dignified life, free from stigma and discrimination. At GNP Plus, we provide global leadership in advocacy for access to treatment and the attainment of quality of life for all people living with HIV, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identities, how they choose to live their lives. And so we are committed to representing the needs and priorities of those of us who are underserved, marginalized, or excluded from health and other services, and are prevented from participating in the decisions that impact their lives. Most of the people we shall be talking about today. It is why this work was important for GNP+. The findings of this report you've had today, and thanks, Matt, for sharing a brief overview of that, are both chilling and inspiring. Chilling because coming from East Africa, I also live in a space where I see the repercussions of what you're reading today. We are inspired by the progress of the LGBTQ communities and their allies, including us, the people living with HIV. But also sometimes I don't think we are allies. Within all people living with HIV lie everyone within the LGBTQ community. In the decades-long effort to throw off the mantle of colonial and discriminatory laws that have criminalized same-sex sex in our countries, the trend is clear. Most of the world is rejecting criminalization. However, we are also deeply concerned about those places that are out of step with that trend and instead continuing to deepen criminalization, persecution, and discrimination against the LGBTQ communities. I'm speaking as a Kenyan, and I can share how deeply worried I am about the coordinated efforts that are happening in East Africa to replicate these laws and condone violence and discrimination that we are seeing in Uganda, but that I've also seen and witnessed as some of my peers and colleagues get attacked day in, day out in my country this year. Their inability to work, to be able to come together, comes from the fact that there is this coordinated effort. I think some of the reality is we don't need the law to be in place. The idea that some people are othered already makes it impossible for us to exist, to be able to do our work, for people to access HIV prevention and treatment intervention. We need to push back against this for the sake of people's dignity, human rights, and health and HIV. The global AIDS response has for decades understood protection of human rights as inextricably linked to stopping HIV transmission and ending AIDS deaths. Criminalization drives people away from HIV services and opportunities to bring their knowledge and their strength to participate in the AIDS response. We cannot have programs and interventions that respond to the needs of all people living with HIV if some of us are not able to come into the room and share what their needs are confidently. It also tells them the state wants to arrest them, not recognize them. They are not important. But it tells everyone around them that this is the true case, hence the violence. The deeper the criminalization, the worse the public health harm. A study using the HIV policy lab data showed gay men and other men who have sex with men living under criminalizing law had 5 times the odds of living with HIV compared with those in non-criminalizing contexts. But in countries with recent prosecutions of people under these laws, gay men had 12 times higher the odds. In countries that decriminalize HIV outcomes are better. We see that. People living with HIV were more likely to know their HIV status because they were not scared of persecution, and more likely to suppress the virus because they are able to take their treatment, use their treatment well, reach out for help in case they are facing any challenges with remaining adherable, to adhere to treatment. And the result is they became undetectable. We also know that when someone living with HIV gets to undetectable viral load, they cannot pass the virus. The success of the treatment can only be realized by all people living with HIV in an environment that does not criminalize. The region with the largest number of people living with HIV are part of the trend. Countries like Botswana, Angola, India are choosing not to criminalize. Almost half, which is like 43% of countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, which accounts for almost 43% of the countries in East and Southern Africa. More than 52% of the countries in West and Central Africa and 60% of countries in Asia Pacific region do not criminalize today. But this only makes the severity of some of our people and communities, what it is they are facing, more clearer. For these countries, criminalizing same-sex sex is like fighting HIV with one hand behind their back. I'd like to end with a call to action. The struggle for our rights and dignity and quality of life has reached fervent urgency, now more than ever. Repressive laws, institutionalizing criminalization, prejudice, violence against our communities, particularly those based on sexual orientation and gender identities, do not serve us. They cause harm. They lead to death. Our friends are getting harmed and killed. We ask that you join and support the growing movement for decriminalization and continue to tear down walls of decriminalization and discrimination and injustice. To end HIV, all of us, people living with HIV, must access treatment, get undetectable, and achieve quality of life. Thank you, and back to you, Munyana.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your powerful words. I think it's so important to hear from the communities, people living with HIV, and people doing the work in countries across the world. So thank you for sharing those very personal remarks and for your call to action to see change now with the urgency that's required. So I think we'll move to our last speaker now. Oh, not our second to last speaker. Mandeep, I'm going to hand over to you. Mandeep is the Director, HIV and Health Group at UNDP. Over to you, Mandeep.
Thank you, Minyana. And I want to just thank the 3 previous speakers for their powerful words, each powerful in their own unique way. This is such an important report. UNDP, as a co-sponsor of the joint UN program on HIV and AIDS, which is led by Winnie, is really, really pleased to have been part of this together with O'Neill and GNP Plus and UNAIDS. This is a really timely report. In times where we are seeing an erosion of human rights, gender equality, and civic space, an erosion of rights, and civic space, which is a clear and present threat to the HIV response. We also, at the same time, have a historic opportunity for the removal of punitive laws. I think this report provides us with a very nuanced set of data and evidence and guidance on how to navigate the way forward in these times. We see that countries are working on decriminalization. More countries have decriminalized in the past year than any other year over the past 25. And many more have chosen not to prosecute same-sex sex. That's remarkable. So 79% of countries have either decriminalized or halted prosecutions. It's an encouraging step on the road to decriminalization, but we need to go much further. We need to eliminate stigma and discrimination against LGBTQ people, and we need to ensure full equality in law, including through anti-discrimination laws. We need to make sure that we don't take our foot off the pedal or just take this progress for granted. We know that law reform and enabling legal environments are it's not a linear pathway. So we must remain vigilant, and we must keep pushing forward for full protection of the law, full equality in law. The evidence continues to show that decriminalization saves lives and wastes precious resources. At the same time, it undermines the HIV response, as we heard so eloquently from Florence. Removing harmful laws helps people to access life-saving HIV prevention and treatment. At a time where we have some of the best tools we've ever had for both treatment and prevention, we need the laws to work for the HIV response rather than against it. Decades of leadership from LGBTQ communities and civil society advocacy, as well as the work of the Independent Global Commission on HIV and the Law, which UNDP convened on behalf of the joint program, make clear that an enabling legal and policy environment is critical to effective HIV responses, and it's critical to the sustainability of HIV responses. Since 2012, UNDP, together with government, civil society, UN, private sector, and communities, has worked with 97 countries to follow up on the Commission's recommendations to protect the health and human rights of people living with HIV and those most affected by HIV. The benefits are clear. We've heard about them from the speakers today. In countries that have decriminalized, people living with HIV in key populations are more likely to know their HIV status and can access treatment at significantly higher rates. Everyone benefits. People living with HIV in criminalizing countries have 11% lower knowledge of their HIV status and 8% lower viral suppression rates. Many countries are even going further to protect rights, which can help drive more progress against HIV. 78 countries have anti-discrimination protections on the basis of sexual orientation. 50 countries have anti-discrimination protection on the basis of gender identity. 49 countries have both. And the overall result is healthier and more prosperous communities and societies. Homophobia and punitive laws cost the world more than $126 billion per year. Across 132 countries, each legal measure improving the legal environment for LGBTQI populations was associated with a $2,000 increase in GDP per capita. All of this progress is not an accident. And this is a point that I want to emphasize that has been raised by some of the other speakers. It is the result of the courageous leadership of LGBTI communities, people living with HIV and other key populations, working together with enlightened institutions and allies towards decriminalization and anti-discrimination. We need much more of this kind of solidarity in a world that is suffering from a solidarity deficit. We've heard from Winnie about some of the examples of countries that have taken progressive steps. All of them have done so after inspiring campaigns and leaderships of the communities and civil society organizations. These are not isolated examples, but they are part of the story that is key to ending AIDS by 2030. Bolstering the capacity, capability, and leadership of communities, key populations, as well as institutions to change laws, policies, and practices in criminalizing countries is critical. Programs like the UNDP partnership on the SCALE initiative, which is a partnership with the Global Fund, GNP Plus, and UNAIDS, is working to amplify the efforts of people living with HIV in key populations to counter punitive laws and HIV-related criminalization. We're trying to accelerate progress to achieving these historic 10-10-10 targets. But we can't stop here. This report is not just about progress. It's also about the peril. There is a dangerous anti-LGBTI counter trend, which is threatening the progress, and decriminalization continues to harm and cause destruction in too many places, hampering efforts to end HIV as a public health threat by 2030. Some countries have criminalized speech relating to LGBTI people, and others have intensified penalties for consensual same-sex sex. This kind of legislation is dangerously out of touch, fuels hate speech and violence towards LGBTI people, and makes it even more difficult for people to access basic services. To those who traffic in hate and phobia, this report is giving you a clear message. It's time to join the rest of the world and to do the right thing and be on the right side of history. The past decades show that respecting human rights improves health and prosperity for all. We are eager for you to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mandeep, for your remarks. And thank you for saying the word solidarity. That is something that is sorely lacking today and what we need the most across sectors, across governments, across civil society. I'm now going to hand over to our final speaker, Vivek Divan. Vivek is the head and coordinator of the Center for Health, Equity, Law and Policy at the Indian Law Society. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, and thanks to all the organizers for having me on the panel. I have a limited amount of time, and in that time, there's quite a rich story to be told about India, so I will confine it to a few observations. First, a little bit of background. I'm a lawyer from India who has long worked at the intersections of sexuality, health, and rights, with a particular focus on HIV and LGBTQ contexts. I identify as queer, and I had the great fortune of being at the heart of the decades-long LGBTQ decriminalization effort in India. This was a challenge to the colonial era Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. A law which the British then took all around the Caribbean and parts of Asia and certainly parts of Africa. The litigation that led to the decriminalization of queer people in India was filed in 2001 through an HIV NGO. It had many ups and downs, being dismissed on the grounds of locus standi in 2004, reinstated in 2005 by the Supreme Court, and finally heard in 2008, with a positive decision being adjudicated in 2009, all by the Delhi High Court. So this was when we were first decriminalized. Thereafter, we were recriminalized by the Supreme Court in appeal in 2013, which saw the errors of its own ways and finally decriminalized us in 2018. So that's a 2-decade-long journey. There were many unique aspects to this journey, as there are with most intrepid efforts, but I will highlight one which was unprecedented in my reading. It was this: the case was at its heart embedded in the queer community. It was a participatory approach at litigating that provided an opportunity for the queer community to be educated about how the law and the courts work, and an opportunity for a robust engagement of legal literacy by the lawyers involved in the case, many of whom, including myself, were from the community. To demystify the law and to make its jargon and pomp accessible and unintimidating to the queer community. What was the impact of such a collective, complex, participatory effort? This resulted in the sort of empowerment and energy that galvanized a vast civil society effort led by LGBTQ collectives and organizations. This collective effort led to so many other positive developments. I'll name a few. One, the creating of alliances with other movements and ecosystems. We worked with the HIV movement, we worked with the women's rights movement, we worked with the labor rights movement, we worked with child rights movements and ecosystems. They became allies in this journey of seeking decriminalization. There was a realization that one marginalized group's decriminalization meant the oppression of all. The informed strategic thinking around how to proceed with the case when it was confronted with setbacks was something that was nurtured through this participatory process. Everything from thinking about including working to identify parents of queer people, historians who have actually looked at queer history in India, mental health experts who all filed their own supporting petitions to strengthen the main petition and main case. Another very positive outcome was the advocacy with the Health Ministry and the National AIDS Control Organization to file an affidavit in court to support decriminalization, which was at odds with the affidavit of the Home Ministry of the same government in charge of criminal law, which said criminalization should remain on the books. So the court saw the contradictory approaches of the government because of the phenomenal advocacy effort of civil society, the HIV movement, LGBTQ networks, etc. And finally, a very critical realization that in a deeply classist society such as India, it was vital that the case is representative of and amplifies the most marginalized of our varied queer realities in order to demonstrate the violent impact of criminalization on all our lives. This was important because often the courtroom is a place you go to, which is largely inaccessible to most of the population. It's deeply intimidating. It is very expensive. And we really wanted to make this case open the doors of the court and for the community to feel that they could walk in and actually claim their rights, and the most marginalized amongst us. And I think this case really did that in powerful, powerful ways through the testimonies of queer people very much at the margins. All of this contributed to greatly nuanced decisions, both of the Delhi High Court in 2009, which I mentioned in the first instance, and then in 2018 by the Supreme Court, which were the positives. But when there was crisis, this sort of collectivization also stood us in good stead, because there was anger and protest when we came onto the streets and lost in 2013, which was the exercise of the democratic right to free speech when rights were denied. It was a powerful moment which the press and the media covered, where the campaign was called "No Going Back." The community fought back to see to find to get to the courtroom again and to actually revisit the case, which happened in 2018. Let me end by saying that while other challenges continue for the queer community, the way in which we fought decriminalization holds us today in good stead, where we have community groups that have created robust support networks to counter violence or link queer people with health and other services. And by health, I don't mean just HIV anymore, mental health services and other issues. And where legal aid now exists through lawyers' groups to assist queer people in need. There are other challenges that some of you might have read about in recent news, which I don't want to get into, but I'm happy to answer about. But I think the India experience is a really interesting one in the way in which we came together, not to really be representative of this vast array of us who are LGBTQ, and to actually make the court realize our realities in an impactful way, which hopefully others can learn from in their efforts through the courtroom, certainly. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vivek. Thanks for sharing that experience from India. So we're going to now move to questions. We are going to do a round of questions where I'll pose questions to the speakers, and then we'll come back around if there are further questions. So to Mandeep, what has surprised you most about the drivers of HIV-related law reform? A question for Winnie. Winnie, what is your response when African governments say it is anti-African to be homosexual as if it is imported outside of Africa? I think you spoke directly to this. Or that anti-LGBTQ measures are in keeping with being a proud African. Matt, what year do you use as the baseline for the data? And for Florence, where have you seen success in efforts for decriminalization in Africa? And what were the driving factors there? Another question for Mandeep, if you can take 2 questions this round. Some of the countries that are criminalizing LGBTQ people have been supported by right-wing US Christian groups, particularly Family Watch International, in precisely what Florence described as an organized and coordinated campaign. Have you engaged with any of these groups, and are there any opportunities to litigate against them or their local partners? That's from Kerry Cullinan, Health Policy Watch. Hi, Kerry. To Vivek and Florence, the draconian anti-gay law in Uganda is linked to anti-gay strategies by US right-wing evangelical groups designated as hate groups. How can we address their role in exporting hate and undermining US foreign policy, including HIV programs like PEPFAR? That's Anne-Christine Dedaski, freelancer. And one more to Matt. How does homophobia increase cost burdens by $126 billion? So can I start with Mandeep, who I think has two questions? You're on mute, Mandeep.
Unmute. Okay. So the question about what surprised me the most about the drivers of law reform, I have to say, I think it has been for many years. It wasn't surprising, but it's worth noting that it has been for many years one of the underexplored, underinvested areas of the HIV response. So I think for many years we did not use the law as a tool in the HIV response. So I think that for me was not necessarily surprising, but something that I think really needed to change. The other thing that has been really important has been the need to build capacity, and Vivek talked about this, in communities to be able to understand the law, to use the law, and to understand the legal system. And I think that's been a really critical feature of the movement that we're seeing towards decriminalization and the removal of punitive laws. So I think that's critical. Not only is it about strengthening the capacity of communities to lead, but it's also about strengthening the capacity of institutions. So one of the most powerful things that we saw, and I think it surprised me, we had a hunch that it would be useful and impactful, but when Vivek and I were working on the Global Commission on HIV and the law, one of the most powerful things was for lawmakers and those who enforce the law to hear directly from people who were affected by the law. So hearing the lived realities of people living with HIV, LGBT communities, key populations, was one of the most powerful drivers for positive legal change that I have seen. It proved to be incredibly impactful. So I think creating those kinds of spaces is really important. The role of allies, the role of multilateral institutions in creating that kind of space to convene and to bring together, those who are enforcing laws, those who are shaping laws, and with the people who are affected by those laws, to me, I think was a surprise about how powerful that was in legal change. The other thing, which is, it's not surprising, but I would like to say, legal change doesn't come for free. It required that investment in building capacity and supporting community groups is critical. So funding of civil society communities is critical for them to be able to do this kind of work. Funding the kind of research that we're putting out today, also very critical. The evidence is super important, and to get the evidence out there. And let me now link that to the second question. I think there's a lot more that we need to do as allies, and I include the media in that, in exposing where this effort, organized effort, is coming from to export hate and phobias around the world. That needs to be exposed, exposed outside the HIV community, outside the LGBT community, to governments, to the private sector, And the media needs to play its part in exposing that in a way that that can help us to push back against this erosion of rights, gender, and civic space. And then I want to just end on one point, which is part of the first question, really, is the point that Vivek made. I think we can't emphasize enough. And that is that the allies are not just in our own communities. The allies are across communities and across sectors. And building those allies is really, really critical to effective and sustainable legal change. I'll stop there. Thanks very much, Vinyana.
Thank you so much, Mandeep. I'll go to Winnie for the next question. You're still on mute.
Glad it wasn't just me.
You're still muted. It seems maybe Winnie can't come off mute. Can we assist her, please? And while we do that, I'm going to hand over to Matt.
Great. So two questions over my way. Let me start with the economics question. So this is cited in the report. It's work by Eric Lamontagne at UNAIDS and Michael Ross at the University of Minnesota and Mark Delby at London School. Basically, they looked overall and found two really clear empirical factors. One was lost productivity, that actually criminalization and increased homophobia was linked very clearly to reduced productivity among a significant portion of the population. And that, in fact, was a key piece of it. The second was significantly increased health costs. And so if you pull together all of those, this was a study that's a few years ago at this point, and so it doesn't account for the most recent decriminalizations. But if you pull all of those together, they estimated $126 billion around the world due to those two key factors. Second, on our report findings, the baseline data, we looked at several different moments. The HIV Policy Lab was started in 2020, but we went back to 2017. But we were also able in our research to go all the way back to the beginning of the AIDS response, which was 1981. The pandemic. We looked at 1981, and we also looked at 1996 as two different years, since 1996 is when the joint program began. And what we see is a steady decriminalization during that period that's actually ramped up since then. The fact that we've got 13 countries that have decriminalized just since 2017, and we did look at the last 25 years, and this year and last year, 2022, was the biggest year for decriminalization that's happened in 25 years. So this is a kind of trend that is we hope accelerating and will continue to accelerate as we go. Over.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to turn now to Florence for her questions. Oh, you're back. Okay, thank you.
Should I now?
Please go ahead.
The question was about
anti-Africanness.
Being anti-African. This is a claim that is not based in fact at all. Our history as African people shows that there were always people, a minority, who practice same-sex sex, men and women. In fact, for parts of Africa, like where I come from, noble men had the license to practice, to have same-sex sex with very openly. Very, very openly, while others were more hidden. So it was always there, and the practice in most African societies was to accept it as a reality for a small group of people, and sometimes, because it was the main that was praised, there would be attempts to marry off people like that, have a heterosexual relationship that's public, and a closet relationship that is homosexual. All this speaks to, there was no equality for sexual minorities, but there was also no punishment There was no criminalization, if you see what I mean. It was a more enlightened policy, though not equality, until colonialism came and made it a crime. It was not a crime. But the second thing that such people who make this claim contradict themselves is that culture shifts, culture changes, it is dynamic. There are so many aspects of our African culture that today the same people would not accept as African anymore. For example, female genital mutilation. As African feminists, we said, no, this is not culture. This is unhealthy. This harms a girl. This is not right. And we opposed it. And many people today will say that this is not African. We've passed that. It's wrong. Women didn't eat meat. Women didn't eat chicken. There were so many rules that denied women equal opportunity in society. Today, nobody claims that this is the African way. Let's go back to it. So there's something disingenuous about those who claim culture and make it static. And the last point is that politicians usually make this argument of it's an African, really with the purpose of disenfranchising LGBTQ people from society. That is their purpose, because once they put them in a category of not citizens of Africa, then they are denied all their rights. So it's used for disenfranchising a minority. So I totally don't respect it. I'm a very proud African. You couldn't get more proud as an African. I am a proud African, and I support, I promote, and I respect and cherish LGBTQ people.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that remark. So we're going to go to Florence, and I'm going to just check in with the O'Neill folks if we can go a little bit past the hour, and so we can wrap up. So over to Florence and then Vivek. Thanks.
I saw two questions, which I'll try to sort of answer in one and say this. I think, and I will just use, I will leave the data and everything to Matt and the HIV policy lab team, and just speak like a human in a country, and who is also a person living with HIV and who has engaged in this work over time. I think one of the things I have experienced from myself and I see happening now is this persistent fear that comes with things we don't understand. And we are quick to put them under culture or the bad thing or something. And we start to treat human beings differently. I'm an African. I don't know if there's any story that allows for an African person to decide someone is not African enough to live, and so they must be persecuted. Okay, I don't understand where this ideology came from. And so to start off of, do we see this? And for me, my arguments have been, but they are a human being. They are you and me. Even if, and I'm sorry, this is me going into my community head, even if we were to look at them from the sex angle, how much sex are you having in a day? Like, come on. So we need to stop being very singularly minded about a certain group of people so that we can use that to persecute and harm and create an enabling environment for people to exist. Not because of anything. I don't even like that we have to have these conversations from a HIV lens. It's because we are all human and we need to all be allowed to exist free from fear, free from persecution, and to be okay. And for us to allow that to happen, we must also be willing to accept our true expressions. I feel like most of the time we don't know how to accept ourselves, so we project that, but that's a story for another day. Countries like Botswana have really done a great job in decriminalizing, and you can see how that is shifting the HIV narrative in that country. And the story there is not as far, when we say age shifting, they are closer to the 95, 95, 95. I think they've passed the 90, 90, 90 targets. It's because when you open up the space for everyone to come and access services, when you are deliberate as a country, as a government, to address the social barriers, to address stigma, discrimination, violence, inequities, then people will come and access prevention and treatment interventions. It's your way, it's been proven by data, it will give you positive outcomes. How do we do that? Vivek's story rings true. We start by mobilizing as a community to identify what are these laws, what are the opportunities, I used to sit in my country as I worked at the network of people living with HIV when our constitution was renewed in Kenya. And we had these little books that we were given by UNDP, and we were going around to teach people in the village about, the sections around community participation, the right to health, all these things. But if we cannot even come together, how would we begin the work around law reform? And so the experience we faced as GNP Plus and other partners who are supporting key population-led organizations this year, particularly through our Love Alliance work, which seeks to build advocacy right from grassroots to global. It's impossible. We are just supporting people to seek help, to seek security, and it's taking away the time and energy that we could use to educate the public, educate our governments, and really do the work around law reforms, because communities must drive this work. The science is there to show us why it's critical and important. The legal environment must be conducive for us to engage in. Most of those countries, like India, Vivek will tell you, the governments were taken to court and the court judgment prevailed. So there's a whole responsibility and the aspect around community tying together with the legal and the reforms happening in a process that brings everyone together. We need to address community counter-narratives that are coming. We need to educate our community away from the counter-narratives that are coming from the anti-rights people. And we need to start those conversations, and community must be supported to do this work, to start the conversation on humanity. We are all human, and we must start from addressing each other from that aspect. I hope that answers the questions, and back to you, Jan.
Thanks. I'll hand over to Vivek.
Thanks, Manyan. I will just respond with a couple of things that I observed. And actually, while working on the Global Commission on HIV and the law, I think we teased the issue of religion a little bit. The commission didn't get into it beyond a point, but there was certainly some research that took place and some understandings of how we can actually grapple with some of these issues around sexuality through some kind of a religious lens. In that period of time, I came across someone who I thought was doing some fascinating work. So let me put the name there. I don't know what Reverend Kapia Kaoma does these days. I'm not been in touch of late, but he used to really talk about sexuality within the Christian kind of framework, but speak about it in positive terms and very much in an African context. I think we've got to challenge a lot of this, which comes our way based on religion, by countering back based on religion. I think that is useful also to change the popular sentiment. If the popular sentiment is being aroused through religion, then I think common sense should prevail through arguments based on religion. And I think I vividly remember a really interesting book which was published about a decade ago now, I think edited by Professor Sylvia Tamale, where she speaks of course, the Africanness of homosexuality and sexuality generally, and its kind of myriad manifestations, but also speaks of within culture, within long-held African contexts, how some of this. Now that's a brilliant book, but I think we've got to take that book and kind of de-jargonize some of the academic kind of research, etc., and really be able to communicate this in terms which are more accessible. I think that's one way of countering this view. there's so much more else that I can say about this. I mean, the perverse way in which evangelical churches in the United States kind of attack on these fronts. We haven't had that in India, although there was an attempt made to approach the courts in India by some of these groups, which was fortunately rejected. I think we did a pretty interesting thing in India generally around even allies of ours from the global north who tried to help us in the litigation. We kept them at bay because we wanted this to be an indigenous effort, and we thought we had it covered, and we did, obviously, finally. But I think there's arguments around religion and from the religious perspective which can kind of work in our favor too, probably. I'm not a scholar on this, but I think that's another thing we got to kind of unravel a bit and figure out whether that's an approach worth taking.
Thank you. Thanks, Vivek.
And sorry, can I just say hi very unprofessionally, but say hi to Anne-Christine.
Okay. Allowed. So thank you, everybody. We are over time, and I would like to just ask our panelists to each take a minute to give closing remarks, and then also to say that we are holding an additional dialogue tomorrow at 2 p.m. Johannesburg time, 8 a.m. New York time, and that will be open to members of the public. If there are remaining questions from members of the media, please pose those to the communications contacts that are earlier in the chat. So let me first ask, I'll go in the order in which you appear on my screen. Florence, your closing minute, and then Mandeep, and then Matt, and then, oh, there are a lot of people on this. And then I think Winnie. Yes, that's all the people. And then Vivek, sorry.
Okay, I think I will just start by saying the value of reports like what we are seeing now is there is an organized way in which data shows the importance of looking at rights-based approaches to ensure everybody accesses services. And this zeroes in on laws that criminalizing same-sex sex, having a huge barrier for people from the LGBTQ communities accessing prevention and treatment services. It is a unique document that can be used for advocacy, but can be used to challenge narratives and policies that continue to refuse to see and follow the science. And it also is a document that communities can use to further our advocacy. Usually we are told our lived experience is not enough. And for many of the people represented in this report, they may not get the opportunities to come into the rooms because they're probably not allowed. But with that report, their voices and their experiences carry forward. And with many of us having this report and using it as we can, with support from the media and others, we can be able to begin to challenge the laws and policies that continue to keep people away from HIV prevention and treatment. And I hope, and this is my call, that you join me in understanding that all of us, people living with HIV and our communities, need treatment in order for us to be able to have quality lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Please go ahead, Mandeep.
Thanks so much. And I really just want to close with three sort of messages. The one is the message where Florence ended. It is really about giving voice, giving space, and amplifying the voices of communities and people who are affected by these laws. That is a key driver of the kind of legal change we need. And I saw that one of the questions was about why is decriminalization of LGBTI people happening at a faster pace than decriminalization of HIV transmission. I think there's some things that we need to do there to really make sure that we amplify those voices too. So standing in solidarity with communities, bringing them together with the institutions that can become allies, and broadening the base of allies is really, really critical. The role of the media in this and supporting the media, really amplifying the kinds of messages that we have in this report, the data that we have is really, really important. So we need to see more of that, and it's a plea to the media. I know there's many other things that are, that are ending up on front pages of newspapers and blogs and websites, but this is also very important, and we count on you to be a very active ally in this fight to end unjust decriminalization of LGBTQI people and people living with HIV and other key populations. Finally, we have a historic opportunity. These 10-10-10 targets were agreed by countries, and they call on us. It's a call to action for all of us to work together to remove these punitive laws, policies, and practices that are impeding HIV responses, but are also undermining the dignity of those most affected. So this is a real opportunity for us, and reports like this, I think, give us really important guidance on how we move forward together. And I think that's the final thing. The solidarity is critical. Without the solidarity, we won't continue to make progress. There's still a lot more to do. And this dangerous counter trend that's reported, that's identified in this report is also something that should give us pause. The job is not done when you change a law or when you decriminalize. We need to keep going. And we need to be vigilant to safeguard that progress. Thanks.
Thank you, Mandeep. Thank you very much. Matt, 1 minute.
So at the start of the AIDS response, or the AIDS pandemic, 2/3 of countries criminalized same-sex sexuality. Today, 2/3 of countries, as of this year, do not. And that is an important change. But of course, that still leaves 1/3 of countries that continue to criminalize. And a portion of those countries where this report documents, there's not only bad laws on the books that are actually harming the AIDS response, but those are being actively enforced. The progress and the possibility is very clear. The link between HIV and reduced HIV and decriminalization is clear. Those countries that have chosen the path of decriminalization, they are realizing the benefits in public health and in economics. It's not a mistake that some of the world's largest economies, some of the world's most powerful countries have recently decided that they are actually going to continue to lead this trend, and that's the move that's happening in the world. And so my hope is that what we will see is other countries deciding that they would rather be far more like the countries that have decriminalized and move in that direction. That is where the trend is going. That is where the future is. And it's the future of public health and the future of a variety of different kind of economic and leadership realities in the geopolitical space that we are in, despite those that are pushing hard against it. Several questions were out there just briefly on this question of the ways in which I sit here in Washington, noting that there is a concerted campaign, that there are US organizations that are pushing actually the deepening of criminalization, and they are seeing these places where there's deeper, where there's both criminalization and enforcement of that law as opportunities. And we should just recognize that for what it is, a neo-colonial push actually from outside that seeks to impose views that are not actually able to take hold in some societies on other societies. And that is actually a deeply problematic push because it's well-financed, it's well-coordinated. But what we see is that the consensus is in the other direction. And the hope is that governments will see that and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. I will hand over to Winnie, and then lastly, Vivek will close us off. Thanks.
Thank you. I will return to that question of culture and how it is used to justify criminalization, and say that culture is shaped by those who have power. And always those who have power will write the rules to suit themselves. And so I find it very difficult to accept that so many leaders, even those who have been in revolution, fought for social justice, come back to make arguments of cultural relativism. wanting to describe their culture as perfect, refusing to criticize even those parts of their culture that are problematic. And I mean, if we take it back, slavery was part of slave culture. Who would justify that today? Sexism, patriarchy is part of the culture of our people, but we reject it and insist on equality of men and women in society, of all people, of all genders. So for me, we must address this as a human rights issue. I liked your point, Florence, that while we use the lens of HIV to fight, I urge everybody to focus on this as a question of human rights, and that human rights are central to accessing health rights, or health rights are a subset of human rights, whichever way you want to look at it. And that our cultures, our values, our beliefs, our practices should be criticized against those norms that we have set for ourselves as a human society, the human rights that we have all signed on to. I return to that centrality of human rights. The humanness of everybody is what gives them rights wherever they are, in whichever country and whatever status they have. Human rights are central to our fight against HIV, and we can't win on HIV without pursuing human rights and women's rights.
Thank you. Thank you I couldn't agree more, Winnie, with your final remark there about the centrality of human rights. Thank you. Vivek, we're going to end with your last remarks and then we'll close off. Thanks.
Sure. Quickly, just to say that I think I pause and consider where we are in 2023 compared to where we were in 2001 when we began litigating some of this, because there are two things that have definitely changed in the global context, but also in my national context. One is the sense that the courts can actually be the place where we can get grievance redress. I think a lot of our work through litigation is predicated on the fact that there's an independent judiciary, that it is free of all kinds of pressures. And I think, LGBT, HIV, all of this, all of these kind of claims for equality and non-discrimination and rights are also, are subject to what the courts say and sometimes what the legislature says. And I'm not sure that we live in contexts presently which are necessarily conducive to an honest conversation with the judiciary and others. The other thing I'd like to say is that we also live in a time where, and we have to factor this into our work, whether you're at the United Nations or in a community organization, around what is fact and what is fiction, and how social media spins perceptions and in completely disingenuous ways, and around sexuality and masculinity and all kinds of things too. So I think that's another challenge that we have before ourselves. And I think getting parliamentarians, getting legislatures, getting judges, getting the police, getting folks in the establishment and in positions of authority to actually understand and be able to differentiate between what is propaganda and what is not is increasingly, I think, tougher. But that's something that we need to actually really consider when we think of our advocacy campaigns, etc.
Thank you so much, Vivek. And that concludes the event. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for taking the time out and making the effort to be with us today. And thank you to the interpreters who've been with us throughout the session in 3 different languages. Thank you. Thanks also to you who have attended. We remain available. Please check out hivpolicylab.org for the report. And we're available to answer any questions that remain. Thank you.